Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NASM Live. My name is Prentiss, and I am here again with Wendy Batts and Marty Miller. How are you all doing today?
Excellent.
Good, thank you.
And we have the man behind the scenes keeping everything together, Greg. He's behind the scenes, not quite behind the iron mask, but he waves hello to everyone, and he's going to keep it together. He will answer all of your questions this afternoon, or he will send us your questions to answer this afternoon. So let's get started. Today we are going to talk about program design in phase two. Our clients have come to us as a lump of clay, and we're starting to slowly sculpt it to get to what's underneath, realizing, their flexibility, their stability, strength, and eventually power. So tell us what's going on, Wendy, in phase two. What do we want to accomplish? And you tell us about our client today.
Absolutely. Well, last week we spent some time talking about program design in phase one. So when a client came in, what was the best approach on collecting the information and then doing the assessments that we saw fit based on their goals. So today, Marty and I wanted to go over a program design using phase two with the superset. In this program, we will be performing exercises back to back in the resistance portion. So we're going to go over, again, some subjective information and then provide you with the assessment results. And based on what we gathered, how we came up with the program. And we will share this program with you, so you guys will be able to follow along with us as we talk about why we chose what we chose. And then at that point, either throughout the presentation or after the presentation, if you would like to print it, you guys have the chance to do so.
Okay, so let's cue this up a little bit and just tell us briefly, and I know we've covered this and this information is in the book, but why do we do the superset now, and why do we choose the exercises that we do, and what are we trying to accomplish with the acute variables? I gave you a lot there, but I'm pretty sure that you got
it. Sure. So in phase two, we're working on strength endurance. So basically in the warm up, there's going to be a change. We are still going to foam roll. We are going to go from static stretching to active stretching. Again, because maybe there are not areas that need to have the 30-second hold in order to get the proper length back into certain tissues. Now we're going to do more reciprocal inhibition. So we're going to relax muscles and then activate the opposing muscle to try to get better range of motion through the joint. And then we'll go into our pre-warm-up. So again, we are going to be doing core balance and plyo, but again, with a different approach to that. And as we go through each section, we can talk about, what the differences are. Okay. And then when we get to the resistance part, when you're talking about a superset, now what we're trying to do is not only focus on the stabilizers or the small muscles that protect the joint, but now we're going to really focus on building more strength in the prime mover. So that's why we do. And then when we call it a superset, again, under the NASM definition, we are talking about doing something that is stable with one particular muscle and then going into something unstable with that same muscle group.
Okay, great. So yeah, that's important information to get, because there's different ways that just out in the fitness community of the way supersets are represented. So we want to have everyone understand what we're trying to accomplish with how we call supersets. So let's go ahead. Let's learn about. If we go to the next slide, we can learn about your client. Greg. Yeah, let's talk about Greg.
So our client's name is Greg Smith. He's 35 years old, and his occupation is a computer software analyst. So just knowing his occupation, you know that he is sitting for majority of the time in front of a computer. So automatically think about some postural, some typical overactive muscles that we may see with someone that has to do this type of work on a daily basis. Once sitting down with him, we wanted to know some history. So with this particular client, he's never played sports in high school. or in college or anything outside of just playing with his twin boys. And so he wants to, he enjoys being active, playing catch, running around, the typical things that you do as a parent. In the past, he has had low back pain and right shoulder pain, but it has been consistent with a program for 4 weeks now. So he did go through a phase 1 4-week program. We did reevaluate this client. And so because of that, we have seen some changes in his assessment. But he does not take any medication. And once again, when you look at his PAR-Q, it showed nothing to report that would give us any concerns that he is not ready to perform this type of program. His current goals are to lose 20 pounds. Again, when you're asking a client about how much weight to lose, you do want to try to see if there's a particular time frame. With this particular individual, he just says he wants to lose 20 pounds and he wants to, again, do it the safest and best way possible. So he did not specify a certain time, but he wants to continue to improve his fitness level and stay active with his kids. So with this information, Marty and I thought that, based on what we're going to show you next with his assessment results, that he would be good for a phase 2. So let's go to the next slide and show you what we found.
Yeah.
So there we go. So for this particular individual, again, there are a multitude of assessments that we could have done with Greg. In the past, in the first 4 weeks when we had him, the 2 that we chose to do were the overhead squat and the single leg squat. So we wanted to reevaluate where he was. Could we start adding on other ones? Absolutely. But, we got a good amount of information from just these 2 particular assessments alone. So when he did his overhead squat, again, we had him remove his shoes. We put him into the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. And then from that point, we had him squat. And what we noticed is he had very slight external foot rotation, and his arms still did fall forward. And then based on that information, again, we felt it was safe. So we had him do the single leg squat. And the only thing that we noticed was that he had a right side only inward trunk rotation. And for those of you guys that are unfamiliar with that, we actually put a picture of that on the slide. And it's just basically as this client went down into his squat, he slightly rotated toward the leg that was on the ground. So as you can see, he's rotating towards his right foot.
Okay, so now let's paint that picture a little more. When you say that he has slight foot external rotation, and I'm looking more into, can you just elaborate a little more on, was there an improvement? Was there an improvement in that observation between his previous assessment to now? What happened there?
Yes. So when he started and came in the very first time we did his assessment, his feet turned out. I mean, he was the typical. It was very, very noticeable. I mean, even in his static posture, there was no denying that this individual had extremely overactive lateral gastrocs and short head of the bicep fem. And so now when he did it, we have been working with him again for 4 weeks. He's very compliant, so he does do things at home as well. We went over specific things for him to foam roll on his own. So he's, very compliant. And then again, we were seeing this individual anywhere from 2 to 3 times a week. So that's how frequently he was coming in to see a trainer or seeing us. And so when he did it this time, they still, ideally when you're looking at someone, again, we're looking at the knee and the second and third toe, and do they stay in line? And this time when he went and did his overhead squat, there was just slight external rotation, meaning that his feet, when he would go out, a lot of times kind of shift out, but when he came up, they almost straightened back out, meaning straightened back into the forward position. So he kind of, and a lot of it too, as clients come in and they know what you're looking for, because you have constantly been saying, straighten your feet, look at your feet, correct your feet, they start to realize what you're looking for. So oftentimes if they feel that they're going to go out, they will straighten them back up when they come up. And that's just because their brain and you kind of being in their head for so long, that's kind of how it worked out for this particular client. But we know that it's still there. Again, it's not as extreme as it was. We have seen a ton of progress over 4 weeks. And so that's why we say slight, because even as Marty and I have both talked and said over the last few weeks, even if it's a little bit, you want to note it, because as they get tired, it could become more of an issue.
Yeah, of course. And following up on how we categorize slight, and I get this question quite often, and I'm sorry, I'm going to do this early, just get it out of my system. This is a curveball. And this is for both of you. Do we have, let me see if I can ask this properly. You can decline to answer if it's not asked in appropriately. But do we have a point of reference in which we can classify slight, moderate, severe when we're looking at these compensations in the overhead squat assessment? So how would you categorize this slight as opposed to moderate? And I know you know, but can we help the people listening understand what that means?
Well, sure. I mean, for me, again, anything that kind of deviates from the second and third toe. So for me, if it's slight, it's anywhere slightly from the big toe, maybe a little bit past the big toe.
Okay.
Again, everyone to their own, because again, any deviation should be noted.
Sure.
Obviously, if they're turned way out, that would be more severe. Moderate would be, well, they kind of, they go out, they stay out. And then for me, if there's any kind of movement, and there's, again, it's better safe than sorry. And it's other stuff we can continuously be working on. And this particular individual, again, wasn't noted in the subjective information, but he does wear dress shoes when he goes into the office. So I know that he is in a high heel, if you will, pretty much a majority of the day, Monday through Friday anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that. Thanks for that explanation, because that always comes up. Well, how do we classify what makes it slight? What makes it severe? What moves it up or down the priority when we get into the program design a little bit later?
And a big thing is you want to notice too, where did he start and where is he at this point? And if you're seeing, we saw a ton of progress just in 4 weeks, and ideally 4 to 6 weeks is when you would reassess. So if we waited maybe even another week or two, we may not see any. However, I wanted to note it because it was there.
Okay, sure.
And Prentiss, the one thing, and Wendy did such a great job covering it. The only thing I would add this is my own way I do it is, I can watch at what depth the compensation starts. So let's say early on in their squat, their foot started to come out, or whatever the compensation is. Even if I'm starting to see it and it's getting less, but if they're now loading themselves more and having better control and deeper versions of the squat, to me, that's still progress. Okay. Because you could judge, how much more stress is on the muscular system as they run to the squat. So those are another little ways to add to see if people are improving.
And that's exactly what I was trying to get at, and you all did it. You both did it masterfully. There are some things, there are little nuances that you're going to look for to be able to track progress, to have that, and so that influences your programming in a certain way. So thank you for that explanation, and I will let you both continue.
Well, sure. So now that we've gathered the assessment results, again, we could maybe start doing more dynamic assessments and stuff with him at this point. However, again, we want him to just start to go through maybe phase 2, and then later on maybe add in different assessments. If we want to move him up the OPT model, like if he wants to continue training to get to like a phase 5. However, at this point, we feel like we got some great valuable information. Now, again, people are, may say, but there are still some compensations. Why would you put them in phase 2? Why wouldn't you keep them in phase 1? And again, this is really up to the trainer. However, because we have seen such progress in just 4 weeks, and we are still going to be working on stabilization in phase 2, Marty and I both felt that this individual was a good candidate to start him in phase 2, even though there were some slight compensations noted.
Okay. And just again to be clear, and I know that we've all talked about this before, and I've actually spoken about this with one of the members on our advisory board, Matt Jordan. But we, because of patterns that we find ourselves in during the day and with our sports, etc., we're never 100%, never 100% compensation free. And I think that's one thing that sometimes it's difficult to understand, but we want to get as close to ideal as possible. What are your thoughts about that?
I'll jump in. So, the other thing too is when we're looking at the strength endurance, when we start to add the strengthening program, you'll see that the exercises that Wendy and I picked are very targeted. So that's still going to help correct the slight movement dysfunctions that he may have. And so, again, we don't want people to stay in corrective and stabilization training forever. It's just, with my sports medicine background, how I always thought was if somebody was within 90% of ideal, we did very, very well. It doesn't have to be at 100% of ideal, but we want about 90% of ideal. Yeah. So I think those factors really help us. And then, we're not adding in here that we could do a very specific targeted corrective exercise program as part of the warm up and then move into the phase 2. We're just going to do this as a phase 2 program. So that was kind of, the thought process behind it. And you can see from the assessments and now that we move into the program, how we tried to accomplish that.
And go ahead, Marty.
No, go ahead. I didn't see on camera, so I just want to make sure that you were still there. Go ahead.
Yeah, one thing to add in as well. I mean, phase 2 to me is one of the hardest workouts that an individual can do in the model. I mean, phase 5 is extremely challenging as well. Don't get me wrong. However, because this is a new type of training that many people are unfamiliar with the superset component, that we could undulate it as well. So if Greg, again, he's a 2 to 3 time a week, 2 to 3 times a week coming in as trainer. On Mondays, we could have him do, a phase 2. On Wednesdays, we could go into a phase 1 again to still work even more on just the stabilization. And then again, on Friday, we could do a phase 2. So we can still revisit phase 1 just to solely focus on compensations. But to Marty's point, we're still going to target this program to what we found as well.
Okay, perfect. And that's another thing that I wanted to make sure everyone understood is that you still have to allow your clients to progress. And if they're within 10, I've even heard people who are a little more liberal with that, 10, 15% of ideal, of what ideal is, it's okay to progress them just as long as the stuff that you're doing with the warm up and some of the CES content is still targeted and you're still working on motor programming in that aspect as well. So are we ready to find out how you programmed for Greg?
Sure. Right. So what we decided to start with is we're going to perform the self-myofascial rolling. The areas that we're going to target are the calves, of course, bilaterally, bilateral TFL and lats. And Marty, if you want to go into detail on why.
Yeah, we know what he had before. We're still seeing that slight foot turning out. And then with that TFL, when we see that for that internal rotation or trunk internal rotation, you're going to see a little bit of a forward spine with that position. And that really tells us that the glutes aren't really ready to accept the full load of his body weight on a single leg. So that hip flexor complex is still going to be a little bit overactive. And then with the foot turning out, the TFL is associated with that. And then due to his arms falling forward, we wanted to hit the lats.
Yep. And then from there, we went right into active stretching. Again, active stretching is what we do in phases 2, 3, and 4. So under the strength kind of block. And we chose bilateral calves, hip flexors, and lats. Marty?
Yeah. So again, we're going to stick with the same muscles that we targeted in self-myofascial release. And when we're doing the active, we're going to look at, we did one set with 8 reps at a medium tempo, and you're going to hold each stretch for 1 to 2 seconds. So I'll just use the example of a hip flexor. I'm going to drive into hip extension by firing my glutes. That obviously, when I fire the glute, has to inhibit the hip flexor, the muscle on the opposing side of the body. So you can look at it almost as a targeted warm up or targeted activation of the muscle that you want to fire. But that is still a stretching technique. Now, since Wendy brought up the other parts that you can undulate, there's nothing wrong if you had the time where he could have foam rolled and did his static first, then moved into the active. We didn't put that into this workout, but that would not be wrong, especially since we know there's a couple small little compensations we might want to work around. So again, it's another way you could have built through the continuum, but we chose to go right from the foam rolling right into the active for this example.
Yes.
Okay.
And then obviously, after we inhibited and activated through active stretching, now we're going to go into the actual activating of the muscles of the core and balance. And so when we're talking about phase 2, the difference when we're core, remember in fin, there was little to no motion of the spine. And that's when we did the bridges and the planks and those types of exercises. Well, now in phase 2, we're going to add movement of the spine, so flexion and extension of the spine. So we're working more of the global muscles. And so we chose the ball crunch and then a ball back extension. And because we have worked with Greg, we know that he's able to kind of move in different planes of motion because we targeted some of the different types of exercises in phase 1. Again, if you've never worked out with a client before, you may want to hold off on the rotation, for example, in the back extension, but wanted to note that as well.
Okay, and now moving, so let's talk about that single leg squat for a second. And all of you are familiar, with the pistol squat. And if you aren't, you can when we're finished with all, you can contact me on Instagram and I'll have it as a stupid human. No, it's actually a good exercise. I kid about that. That's something that I do like when I'm doing a body kind of a phase 5 routine. But why do we not want to do a squat of that nature, and why do we opt for the single leg squat as it's referenced here?
Who are you throwing
And Marty,
Okay.
I'll throw it. It was for both of you.
Okay.
It was for both of you, but I will since you answered first, Marty, the question is yours.
So it's like a hit the buzzer first, what you're saying.
Yeah, you hit the buzzer first.
Alex, I'll take pistol leg squats for 200, please.
Yeah.
Pistol squats. So it is a cool movement that you see on Instagram, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not opposed to it, but when we throw our NASM hats on, we're going to say, okay, why do we need to do it? If we do it, what's going on in the kinetic chain? Is that appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish? So with the people that can do it under slow control, you've got great mobility of your ankle. I'll tell you that much. I could not do that. I do not have the mobility in my ankle. So I'm impressed when people can do it under control. But when I see what's going on in their movement patterns and what also have to move them in and out of those positions, that's where I start to say, okay, the why. So if I'm solely trying to get our client here stronger on a single leg and getting him in to be able to do triple flexion, triple extension, I'm always going to stick with the single leg squat. Now, when you watch someone do that pistol squat, there's nobody on the planet that can get to grass, I'm not going to say it here, without moving out of their 5 kinetic chain checkpoints. You have to go into a deep posterior rotation of your pelvis at some point. It'll be different for everybody. But if you have optimal hip range of motion, you're going to have 110, 115 degrees of hip flexion. At that point, your femur's not going to move. You're going to just go into a posterior tilt and tuck under. Mm-hmm. It's really cool to, like I said, to see people be able to control that. But when you tuck your pelvis under that radically, your glutes are not going to be the prime mover anymore. And when you come out, your adductor magnus really has to fire. And then if you look at if my glute's not involved nearly as much and I'm in a posterior tilt, any load that you might be carrying is going to put more stress on the lumbar spine. So again, you just have to weigh these things in. Is it cool to watch? Is it something I've always wanted to do, like a muscle up? to accomplish it, or am I really improving my human movement system by doing it? So those are the two factors. You will make your decision on what you think is most appropriate. But if I'm trying to teach people how to move properly to eventually get into the power phase or other strength phases where I might load their squat pattern, I need them to be able to maintain neutral spine and make sure their glutes are really doing a lot of the work. And then I've always said, as an athletic trainer, in my head, it's risk reward. What exercises give me maximum reward with the least amount of biomechanical risk? So again, I'm always going to lean towards keeping their spine in that neutral position.
And to add on to that, I mean, it's extremely hard. I mean, to be able to hold your other leg out, I mean, it does require a lot of strength in your hip flexors, which, you know, again, with this particular client, he is in a seated position. Even though he didn't have any compensations, he's in a seated position for, you know, multiple hours. So he may not have the strength to really perform that without compensation.
And the one thing that I can add, and I know a couple of you have heard this, you know, if you're on the webinar from before, and Wendy and Prentiss, you've heard this 1,000 times from me, is I'm okay with people doing sports. I did mixed martial arts, not safe biomechanically. That's not why I did it. I did it because I enjoyed the competition of it. But my job in the fitness, in my mind, is get myself moving as properly as possible. So when I go do crazier stuff, my body can handle the stresses of it. So a muscle up, you know, the squat that we're talking about here, the pistol squat, those are more sport-like movements in fitness, like handstands, etc. So I'm not afraid to build people towards getting better at those, but it's not a primary focus of my human movement strategies. That's my philosophy. So I'm speaking for myself on this one, but that's kind of how I justify some of these unique movement patterns versus what I'm going to talk about in restoring ideal proper human movement.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you both for that explanation. And yeah, it absolutely boils down to understanding what you're trying to accomplish. Number one, we're trying to develop balance and proper movement patterns off that single leg, risk to reward, and then risk to reward. Know what you're doing, and is it acceptable? Is it going to move the mark for you in your training? Oh, well, you can take this off. Both of these questions seem like they're for me. So Hamoon, and if I pronounce your name improperly, please forgive me. And thank you for joining us today. Hamoon wants us to explain bilateral. What do we mean when we say bilateral? And we're going to go back to Latin school. You know, I never took Latin in school, but I'm just making that up. But we have that one word bi and lateral, meaning on a side, and we have that bi meaning two sides. So when we say we're doing an exercise bilaterally, that means we're performing that exercise. Usually when we're doing it with a dumbbell, we're doing that exercise on both sides of the body. So whether that's, then it becomes a differentiator if we're doing a scaption, for example, or let's take the squat pattern. We could perform that unilaterally. We could do the single leg squat, or we could do it bilaterally, or just the squat, both feet down on the ground. And that kind of works for every exercise. And Melissa wants to know, and thank you as well for joining us today. Melissa, I guess this is for the entire panel. What do you think about the pistol squat on a suspension trainer? My opinion is that it's okay, provided that, again, understand what you're trying to accomplish with the exercise. We never want to be in the position of doing an exercise just for the sake of that exercise. We actually want to have a rationale behind it. If you've owned the strength, the mobility, as Marty talking about, to do this movement, and you understand the risks and rewards associated with it, it's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine to do. Know how you want to use it. Make sure that you're staying as safe as possible and go for it. What do you say about it?
If I was going to say, nothing changes from what I said before. The only thing is the suspension trainer is a teaching aid. So if somebody really wants me to get them to do it and they have the right rationale to do it, and I've decided that, okay, this is why we're doing it, and they're not ready to do it yet without the suspension trainer, the suspension trainer is a aid to get them to do it without it. But mechanically, and the reasons why I would or wouldn't do it did not change. It's just the suspension trainer now gives me another ability to regress it. So that way, but biomechanically, nothing's changed.
Right. Okay. Wendy?
I'm the same way. I mean, again, I don't see anything wrong with somebody performing an exercise as long as it's safe. So there are some exercises that, that we see could be very harmful because of just the positioning of different joints. But if Melissa enjoys that type of exercise and she's getting full glute and quad activation, she's getting out of it what she needs to, there's good mobility in the ankles and the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints, she can stay within alignment, and it's something that client or herself enjoys, then go for it.
All right. And finally, for this round of questions, Paul. Paul wants to know, and thank you for joining us today, Paul. If someone has bad ankles, and I think this is a question for you, Wendy. If someone has bad ankles, what replacement would you use for the single leg squat assessment? Or maybe this was for Marty.
We'll start.
Go for it.
Well, I mean, I think again, you want to keep it safe. And so when you mean bad ankles, is it bad ankles because of a lot of, ankle sprains or something like that? Or is it bad ankles because they had, a plate put in? Like, there's multiple ways of bad. So, I mean, if there's something more specific you can provide, then maybe we can give you a better answer. But again, if that client cannot do a single leg squat, I think it was assessment that you asked about, then I wouldn't do it. Then at that point, just do the 2 legs, get the information that you need, and then continue to design a program that's beneficial for that individual.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So let's, and I don't want to speculate for you, Paul, but let's go ahead and do this. And this is for both you, Marty and Wendy. So let's take 2 cases. Someone who has that chronic instability, chronic sprains, and has all of the inhibition and spasm that will come with that. Or let's take someone, now when we say, and Paul is clarifying that it's a left inversion sprain, inversion injury. Okay, so there's that case, chronic instability, chronic ankle sprain, inversion sprains. And then let's take someone where they may have a truly bad ankle, like rheumatoid arthritis, where that is that autoimmune condition affecting all of the joints. So let's take those cases and talk through possible assessment for that person.
Well, to me, I don't think there would be any changes. I mean, I wouldn't assess them then single leg. If it's the arthritis candidate and it causes pain, we definitely don't want to cause pain to your clients. And again, you can gather a lot of really good information on 2 feet, just doing the overhead squats. If you could, and you feel comfortable maybe doing goniometric or some of the new mobility assessments that we really go into detail about in the CES, that can actually give you some better idea on range of motion in that particular joint. Again, if somebody is unstable because of ankle sprains, no matter what type of sprain it may be, again, I may not assess them utilizing the single leg squat. However, balance training would be extremely important in phase 1 to really try to work on the stability component of the ankle itself, the arch alignment and the muscles that protect the joint. So that's my answer. Marty, I don't know if you have a different thought process.
No, so just to add a little bit to it, because we're in complete agreement, is I've trained every type of individual. So I've had people with total ankle replacements. You could just do a single leg balance assessment Just, have them by something that's safe, that they can touch, or they know they put their other foot down. And you'd be surprised how when they stand on a single leg, all of a sudden their knee starts wobbling. Well, you can now speculate, what do you think is going to happen if they ever had to hinge from that hip and put more pressure onto that joint due to, the load to carry? Of course, you're going to see more faulty movement patterns. So that's where you can start looking at what you're seeing on two legs, what you're seeing with the mobility, and then start to put the piece of the puzzle together. And then same thing with your ankle inversion. Hopefully, if you're in this webinar as a fitness professional, they've gone through a rehab, because it's so important to rehab. Don't just rest it and let the inflammation go away, because we could get into the statistics on how quick the glute media shuts down, the reoccurrences, the lack of range of motion. So if they've gone through that process and they're coming into fitness, you should be able to hopefully do some type of single leg. Now, if you cannot do a single leg squat assessment on a younger athletic person who had an ankle sprain previously, that might be a red flag going, hey, you're not back from this yet. So that could be a time to refer them back out, because, again, there's a little bit of gray area there. But if there's normally a healthy individual, but 2 weeks ago they sprained their ankle, and they can't do a single leg squat assessment, that might be a time for you to say, you might not be fully back from that yet.
Okay, perfect. So thank you for those explanations. And Paul, I hope that cleared up that question for you. But let's continue working down the template. We're going to do some skill development and resistance training. And Wendy, tell us why you picked what you did in both of these blocks.
Now, again, considering that we have already been working with this individual for 4 weeks, and we know that he's super active with his clients, with his kids, and he's out running around with them and catching, we know that he's a good candidate. That's one of the reasons that we feel very comfortable with doing some type of plyo in a repeating fashion. Now, with that being said, we want to move him out of just the sagittal plane. So we could have the client do squat jumps in sagittal, and then at the same time maybe do some sagittal, some frontal, some transverse. And again, maybe it's just a few reps per time, per plane for the very first set, or they could do 2 or 3 sets in different planes. It's really up to you. But we would actually have this individual do frontal plane and transverse plane squat jumps.
Okay. One thing that I see that's missing there is the fall prevention post-stepping on Lego.
Yes.
He has kids. I think that should be an important skill, but go ahead and carry on. Let's talk about resistance training.
Yes. Well, so again, Marty and I have very often termed, this is the pre-warm-up. So again, they've done, 2 sets, anywhere from, 12 reps or eight a piece, depending on what they're doing. They're warmed up, their body's ready to go. We now put them into the actual quote workout, which is the resistance portion. Mm-hmm. So just to clarify, core, balance, and plyo in phase 2 does not have to be supersetted. That's just warming the body up for the superset routine that we're going to do under resistance. And so with that being said, we wanted to start with a total body exercise combo. And so we paired up the deadlift to bicep curl to alternating overhead press, which is done on a stable surface. So he's on the floor on 2 legs. And then we are going to have him immediately go into a single leg Romanian deadlift to a single arm scaption. And Marty, you want to go into why we chose that?
Yeah, so again, the first exercise is to really attack those type 2 muscle fiber types, get those kind of fatigued, so that way when you go into your second exercise in the superset, you're primarily really working on those endurance, that type 1. So the reason we did the deadlift to curl to alternating overhead press is we love that the hip hinge patterns. It's great. You get some core stability in there, because obviously he's maintaining his 5 kinetic chain checkpoint. And then we decided, because there's still a little bit of the lat tightness, to go to 1 arm overhead press alternating, because when you put both arms overhead, you're going to need full range of motion on the lat. So this is kind of what we call our workaround. We can still add in that overhead press, but we're not requiring as much mobility due to this. That's still something we're working on. And then the single leg Romanian deadlift, again, similar pattern, but now we're on 1 leg. So now we're getting more, the entire leg that's keeping us in balance from the foot all the way up through the hip. And then obviously, as I do a single arm scaption, now I have to have more balance through my core, where if I had both arms out, you can kind of use that in a sense like a teeter-totter. So there's more core requirement when you're doing the single arm. So that's, again, for those that have been on with us here for a while, Wendy and I like to sneak stuff in.
And in this program, you're going to see that we provided rep ranges. I mean, when you're designing your own personal program, you want to pick an actual rep, and then that's your target rep. So we wanted to provide you guys with the actual anywhere from 8 to 12 in order to really focus on the strength endurance. However, when you're designing your program, choose anywhere from 8 to 12. And then after we did the total body, we went right into working the chest. So for this particular individual, we are having him do a floor push-up. Again, you're going to look at his tempo. So when he's doing his tempo, he's at a 202, so 2 seconds down and 2 seconds up, and they're continuously maintaining the proper alignment. But that's the tempo for that exercise, and then he immediately is going to go into a ball chest press.
Okay, that's good. And just a word about the ball chest press. Want to just give a disclaimer or warning for everyone out there. Just make sure that your client has the requisite control to stay on a ball and press at the same time. If you have these tools available, there are other things available like the BOSU or even the I believe that's the TerraCore. TerraCore is another thing that provides similar instability challenges for you that you could use, and it could be a good regression to doing a chest press off of a stability ball.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and a great point. And then again, we know that he's ready for this stuff, because he's gone through 4 weeks in phase 1. So we've done a lot of ball things, but great point. And then we're going to go right into the back. And so again, a 1-arm dumbbell row. Again, we're still following the 202 tempo. And he's immediately going to go into a single leg 2-arm dumbbell row as well. And Marty, I don't know. I mean, obviously we're targeting the back. I don't know if there's anything you want to throw in.
No, we just like the single leg 2-arm row because, again, we can save a little bit of time. We'll do the one leg the first set, the second leg another set, and then the third set. If you went into a third set, you can decide which leg needs more work, or you can go half the reps on each. But, to try to, again, be efficient with our time. But it's a tremendous amount of core work because, again, we're always going to be focusing on that spine and that hip positioning, the chin tuck position, just like on the stability ball chest press. He thinks he's doing a chest press exercise, and we're getting a ton of core work in because everything has to be in those 5 kinetic chain checkpoints.
And then the last grouping that we did was a frontal plane lunge. Again, he did sagittal plane single leg squat touchdown, or a single leg squat, under balance. And obviously then went into working a lot and focusing a lot on the deadlift. So again, in the sagittal plane. So we wanted to take him out of sagittal and move him into the frontal plane. So he did a frontal plane lunge and then immediately followed that up with a side step up to balance. And Marty, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Because working with him, we wanted to get something in the frontal plane, not just keep everything sagittal. So that frontal plane lunge is great, making sure he has good control, and then go right back to a similar pattern. But instead of a lunge, we just went back in the regression 1 and went to the step up because, again, that way it's a little bit lower, not quite as much triple flexion, triple extension, but similar movement patterns. But now we can really have him slow it down and really go into that slow, controlled, longer tempo.
And Prentiss, just Marty and I actually had a fun time designing this program for this client, and we actually spent a lot of time talking about the rest because in the textbook it says, go from strength right into stabilization and then rest 60 seconds. And Marty and I both have the same philosophy and mindset. However, based on time and based on this particular client, Marty, I don't know if you want to talk about our conversation, but I thought I enjoyed it. So.
How we put the whole program together, or?
No, just when we talked about the rest, the 0 to 60 or.
So when we look at it, the interesting thing now with our COVID situation, this might be where we would maybe shift off this vertical load. Because in a vertical load, you're going from one thing to another, kind of moving around the entire gym. in the past, that was kind of fine and acceptable. People may not want to do that nowadays. Now, we've always taught two ways to do it, but this was the conversation Wendy and I were having earlier. So if we went more of a horizontal load where we're doing just, the total body to total body, rest 60 seconds, total body, rest 60 seconds, total body, and then we're done, we move on to the chest or whatever. They're both strength endurance programs. It's just, if you had to categorize, am I focused really on the strength endurance of a muscle group or movement pattern? Or do I want to do strength endurance where I'm bringing in some total body conditioning? So again, this is something you have to weigh. If you're really focused, if let's say they're a marathon runner, you're like, this person does not need to elevate their heart rate. So I'm going to focus really on maybe what their weakness is, which is really hitting these body parts one at a time. Absolutely go horizontal. Not a problem at all. But if you want to sneak in some total body conditioning and more caloric expenditure and keep your heart rate up, you might go more the vertical route. So they're both very, very applicable. It just depends on what you want to accomplish. But I have a feeling temporarily going out of this, coming out of the COVID, going back into the gyms, I might purposely do horizontal for a little bit and just keep people, okay, we're going to be on this bench with our dumbbells and our stability ball. We're going to do all 3 sets. We're going to clean it up while you go to drink a water, and then we're going to go to the next body part. So they're both phenomenal workouts. It just depends on what you're trying to accomplish and now what's the environment that you're training in.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always multiple ways to finish a program, and yeah, that's a good example. When you're working with a marathon runner, probably their challenges, and I'm sure all of us have worked with marathon runners before. It isn't their cardiovascular fitness. So we may want to help them in strength and building more local strength endurance to help them bring that back into their running technique and so on. And then there are people who just don't have time for additional cardio or hate cardio, like the present company. Unless it's involved in, unless there's some jujitsu, martial arts involved. So this may be a way to help get those extra days of cardio by doing a program vertically. So more than one ways to handle that. It just depends on the person, like Marty's saying. It depends on the person who's in front of you and your environment. So now let's go ahead, Wendy.
No, I was going to say, and then when you look at the template, I mean, obviously you'll still see client's choice. For this particular client, we're very lucky because he's like, whatever you want me to do, that's my choice. Like, he doesn't have something specific. However, if you look at this workout, it is a very, very challenging workout that is pretty much targeted every muscle in his body. So it didn't seem that we needed to add something in. However, if somebody wants to just quote target the triceps or target, maybe even the medial calf, because we noticed that his feet were still slightly turned out, we could add those exercises in this part. It's just, we left it as optional because, again, with this client and trying to keep it within 60 minutes, we felt that this program was good as is.
Yeah, perfect. And I would just say to Greg, we're heading into Memorial Day weekend. That optional should be tricep press downs and curls. You have to priorities, my friend, priorities.
Well, he did a bicep curl with the deadlift and the total body. So just keep that in mind as well.
Can never do enough. You can never do enough of that. But Hamoon has. And I'll ask this for both of you, whoever chimes in first. Hamoon wants to know, what about the Renegade row? Would that be a phase 1 or a phase 2 exercise? That's an it depends question from me. It depends on your athlete and what they're able to do. And then for those of you who don't know what a Renegade row is, it's getting into a push-up position or an arms extended plank on 2 dumbbells or kettlebells and doing a row while holding a plank position, doing a dumbbell kettlebell row while holding a perfect plank position. Some people do a push-up in between each rep. But what do you say about his phase 1 or phase 2 question?
I personally use this more of a stabilization. It's an advanced stabilization exercise for sure. So you need to make sure, or when I've done it with my clients, they need to make sure that they pretty much quote own a very good plank, as well as a 4-2-1 count push-up. So as long as they have both of those pretty dialed, then I absolutely add that in. And again, when they're in phase 2, if they've gone through 4 to 6 weeks with me in phase 1, I know that they're ready for that. So I could have him do a one-arm row and then go into a renegade row as a stabilization choice.
Okay. And Marty, what do you say about
in total
that?
agreement with Wendy, of course. But to add, so the different thought is, if I really need the eccentric on the back portion of the exercise, I'm not going to use a renegade row, because the odds of someone being able to do a 4-2-1 tempo with the holding that high push up on one arm. So another way I might use it outside of what Wendy said would be maybe as a dynamic warm up as we're going into more of our power phase. Give them some light dumbbells, because it's so hard, not impossible, so hard to control a 4-second eccentric on a renegade row. So if they can do it, that's phenomenal. But just another way to think about it is you can let them go at a little bit more of with the tempos you tend to see if you're not training with someone like Wendy, who's really going to be spot on with it, and then use it kind of like in a dynamic warm up.
Okay, so 2 very good options, 2 very good thought processes for you, Hamoon, to use that renegade row in your training programs. So now we're ready for Greg to cool down, and his cool down should look familiar.
Yeah, so we did have him foam roll, obviously, the calves, TFL, and lats, which is exactly what he did in the warm up. And then you'll notice that we went from an active stretch, which is to prepare his body before he got started, which again is using more reciprocal inhibition. So now we're trying to get the proper resting length back into the tissues that were used. And so we had him statically stretch his calves, his hip flexors, and his lats.
Okay. Now, regarding the cool down and the order of modalities here, does it matter if you foam roll first or static stretch? Or does the order matter when you're in the cool down phase of the workout? Wendy?
Well, to me, I obviously want to try to get the word length after I foam roll, because again, I'm just trying to kind of flush out the muscles, kind of basically just try to get a better chance of a better stretch. So I would say foam roll first and then statically stretch last.
Okay. Okay. So we are really, that's a great program. And has Greg gone through this already?
He has, actually.
He has?
This is a workout that he has completed. And yes, it can be done within an hour.
Yes. Okay, so then my next question is, and my final question about this is, when you reassessed, what did he look like?
Reassessed after his
after completing phase 2.
He looked like he was drenched, first of all.
Okay.
So how he came in, he was dry and ready to go. He left exhausted. But he, again, we're going to foam roll. Again, he foam rolls. I actually do his stretching techniques at the end as well. But I didn't put him through an overhead squat assessment or reassess his actual alignment. But, as long as the client feels like they got a really good workout, that they're leaving walking straight and, not walking out with some major compensations, like that's a good workout.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So now we're at the end of the hour, and we can actually go to that next slide, just the question mark. And anyone has questions, now's the time to ask your questions before Wendy and Marty go away for Memorial Day weekend. And while we're waiting for other questions to come in, Marty, what are your takeaways from today's session?
Yep. Just like I pretty much say every week, let the model do the work for you. Just really hone in on how you program accordingly. Like a perfect example is that renegade row. A lot of different ways you can use it. You can use it as Wendy said. You can use it as I said. So just like really trying to fully understand why the model is put together this way. It does the work for you. You just have to do the assessments properly, make sure you follow the solutions table, go through the different phases, pick the right exercises. We gave you some different examples of the whys, and then it will start falling into place beautifully for you. And then get creative with it, as long as the science is still applied.
Okay, thank you for that, and we'll get to your information on the final slide. But Wendy, what are your big takeaways from today?
Well, I think, Marty did a great kind of recap of everything. I think that the big thing is don't pigeonhole an exercise. Think about what makes, be creative in your programming, follow the acute variables, because again, we're looking for specific adaptations. That's why we do the tempos that we use. That's why we give you the rep range. So therefore, we're working specifically on the the strength endurance. However, if you want to use a renegade row, use it. If you want to use the TRX, use it. Just think about what purpose is this supposed to be? Strength? Is it supposed to be a stabilization exercise? And then maximize the client output. Make sure the 5 kinetic chain checkpoints stay lined up. Make sure that they quote own the exercise while they're performing it. And if you need to regress or progress, do so. Again, make it safe, but have fun with it. Again, be creative, but make sure it makes sense.
Okay, and finally, we can, I think with this, we'll just let you read your information off and let's start with you since you just finished up, Wendy. And you're first on the slide, how do we find you?
Sure, to email me, you can email me at wendy.batts@nasm.org, or you can catch me on my Instagram at wendy.batts13.
And Marty?
As you'll see there, marty.miller@nasm.org, and then Instagram is miller.marty72.
Okay, and thank you everyone who stayed with us for the hour. Hope you got your questions answered. I hope this gave you a little more insight into programming phase 2 workouts using the OPT model. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Marty. And thank you, Greg, there in the background. And we'll see all of you next time. Have a great